Hello, everyone. My name is Victor. I am the Occult Technician, and this is Mind War, Episode 9. In this series titled Mind War, we are working from a book, also titled Mind War, written by Dr. Michael Aguino. Mind War was written as a global strategy for peace. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aguino was assigned with researching and taking a closer look at the aftermath of psychological operations after the Vietnam War. And he was tasked with coming up with the future of PSYOPs. Now, many of you that hear that may think that's very strange, may not think that this is something that you want to participate in or think about, but the amazing knowledge that's in this book can help us kind of understand some of the things that we're dealing with today, some of the psychological operations that may be running against us, multiple in parallel. And it helps us kind of get an understanding of why we think the way that we do, why we act the way that we do, not only as individuals, but in larger groups. And what we're doing in this series is we are taking the global tactics for the strategy of peace. We're taking those tactics from the book Mind War and we're applying them to our personal lives. The purpose is to overcome and to win the battles of our own lives, deal with the issues of our personal lives, using some of the tactics that we find here in the book Mind War. Now, the main theme, the goal of Mind War, is what we call the Aristos, the best possible scenario for our current situation. We all find ourselves in situation, right? What is the situation that we are in right now? For me, that is the job that I work at, the bills that I have to pay, my age, my health, my family and friends, right? This is the situation. So the goal is to find the best possible scenario for that situation. For you, you may find yourself, if you are a young person and you're still living at home, your situation is that at this moment in time, you are unable to move out of the home. You are unable to, because of your age, go find your own place and go find a job and do the more adult things that you want to do. That's your situation. So the goal with Mind War is to figure out what is the best possible scenario for that given situation. If you find yourself to be an older person, right? Even older than me, folks. And you're dealing, again, living on a tight financial budget and maybe dealing with new health issues that you haven't in the past. Again, this is the situation, right? So what is the best possible scenario for that given situation? And as we've learned throughout Mind War, that we, as individuals, are the best people that are able to take a clear and truthful, honest look at our own situation. No one is better to look at that than we are, if we are honest with ourselves. And again, that's why we look through the tactics of Mind War. What tactics are being used against us? What tactics have we taught ourselves to use against ourselves, right? Often, some of the most limited or limiting factors in our lives are the ones we put on ourselves, right? So we are trying to break all those barriers down, whether we destroy them and no longer have these barriers in our lives, or whether they are ones that we, because of our current situation, that we have to leave up. It's most important that we understand that they're there, right? Recognizing the fact that you are in a psyop is just as important as getting out of it, right? Understanding the reality that we're in, okay? So the beginning part of the book, a lot of different topics came up. But the main focus was on the mind war branch, right? Again, the mind war branch goes into a situation, figures out what is going on, taking that truthful look, right? That's what we do in our own lives when we first start to make this change. We act as the mind war branch. Understand, what are we dealing with? What's the battlefield that we're on? What is the enemy that we face, right? And then we build our uh, mind war plan, right? What can we do to make positive, substantive changes in our lives, right? What can we do to create that very best scenario that will eventually lead us into being able to change our situation, right? So in the last episode 8, we started to talk about the parapolitics branch. We moved on from the mind war branch, and we're now talking about the parapolitics branch. And I like to think of the parapolitics branch almost as the teachers, right? The educators. They come in once the scenario and the situation have been discovered, once a plan is being put together. And now the parapolitics branch comes in to help change the hearts and minds from the strategy of world affairs. You may be changing the hearts and minds of large populations, or in your own life. How do you change the hearts and minds of those around you, your family members, your friends, the people that you work with, the people in your town? It can be a very delicate procedure, folks. As we've talked about before, you don't want to just go in and make all kinds of huge proclamations about these major changes that you're going to make in your life. Instead, behind the scenes, we start to implement some of those changes. And once we successfully implement these changes and we see positive results from them, people will start to see those changes in us. And it's then when they start to inquire that we move to the next phase of propagandizing them. We start to tell them, here's what we're doing to make changes in our personal lives, and here's how things are going to be different from now on. And again, like we've talked about before, some people in your life may not accept that. That may be difficult for them to deal with. And that's fine. They're going to have to heal whether they like it or not. Okay? As a reminder, the goal through all my work is to heal the mind, body, and spirit. And that doesn't just mean for you as an individual, but through your healing, your family, friends, and those around you will begin to heal too. Okay? That's a goal here, folks. So we are on page 167, section D, Evolution to Parapolitics Branch. If the brain of a mind war campaign is the mind war branch, and the hands of the MFB are the parapolitics branch, is what they both exist to engender and enhance the heart. Once a subject group and or area is identified as the object of a mind war campaign, it is the parapolitics branch which is activated to conceive, design, and nurture within it a polis of the highest individual community, morality, what Plato defined as the kalogathia. This is no easy task, as the alienation, inadequacy, inhumanity, and resultant instability of the subject group area are the cumulative consequence of the centuries-old suppression of this principle by their procession of exploitive, utilitarian, and alienating socio-political systems summarized in number B above. Furthermore, the parapolitics branch must tailor every polis to its unique environment and circumstances, which requires sensitivity to and respect for local, non-political, cultural traditions, for instance, religion and gender customs. Again, the goal of the parapolitics branch as educators, we are working for the hearts, changing the hearts and minds of the people, right? And again, on a global scale, you may think of a soldier being dropped into a foreign land where they don't quite understand the customs and culture and religious beliefs of that given area. And so one of the things that they have to do is take those thoughts into, they have to take them into their mind. They have to understand this is going to be what I'm dealing with. You cannot go into a new situation and just try to ignore everything that's already there. You have to deal with it. You have to work around it. So again, if you are in a household that is very religious, very political, understand that that's what you're working with. Don't go in and just go guns a-blazing and set everything on fire and try to turn everybody upside down, because all that's going to do is have people be upset with you, and they're not going to want to listen. So we have to be very careful and respectful of the current thought processes, beliefs, cultures that people have before we go in and just start trying to make massive change with them, right? The key to success in parapolitics is the primal yet insistent and unsuppressible impulse of humanity to be and do the good. This is the final refutation of the cold and cruel totalitarianisms which see in humanity only another natural resource to be exploited or eliminated. It further reestablishes the defining principle of a morally progressive community, that each educated citizen is entitled to a personal formulation of relative truth, which is to be respected, not exploited or suppressed by others. Okay, so that actually was the end of that chapter. Again, respecting the current beliefs of the people that you're dealing with, right? It's something that we have to do, whether you believe the same things they do or not. Just going in there and trashing their beliefs, telling them that they're wrong, and trying to force them to be something that they're not, it's not going to end well for you. It's better to be respectful and do your very best to change the hearts and minds, right? Page 169, Part 3, Campaign. Chapter 6, Phase 0. The members of the League undertake to respect and preserve, as against external aggression, the territorial integrity and existing political independence of all members of the League. In the case of any such aggression, or in case of any threat or danger of such aggression, the Council shall advise upon the means by which this obligation shall be fulfilled. Article X, Covenant of the League of Nations in 1919. All members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Chapter 1, United Nations Charter, 1945. The reality of psychological, or actually the reality of physical war. Utopian appeals for an end to war, whether by international organization, statesmen, philosophers, or artists, are abundant, eloquent, and futile. The impulse, too, it is too strong and pervasive throughout all human cultures and affairs, a natural state of war, most famously observed by Thomas Hobbes. So, as a utopian artist like myself, the goal with what I'm doing here is to help end war in all of its definitions, not just physical war. Physical war will quickly disappear if we can overcome the other wars, the emotional, intellectual, religious, political, those type of wars that we manifest on our own. They seem so fake and unnecessary, right? It's when you see people arguing about politics, when you see people arguing about sports or whatever nonsense it is, it's almost like they're under some type of magical, hypnotic spell. And they're arguing against something that isn't even real. It just doesn't make any sense. So one of the goals here with Mind War is to help tone down some of those wars. Help us to take a better look at reality. Let's stop fighting over nonsensical things, folks. Right? It's these divisions that are built upon really illusions that are very harmful for not just the country at large or the world at large, but for small communities, for individual families, and even relationships between just two people, right? It's these divisions built upon illusion that we're trying to overcome. There is always war of everyone against everyone. Hereby it is manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war. In such a war as is of every man against every man. For war consisteth not in battle only, or the act of fighting, but in the tract of time, wherein the will to contend by battle is sufficiently known. And therefore, the notion of time, it is to be considered in the nature of war, as it is in the nature of weather. For as the nature of foul weather lieth not in the shower or two of rain, but in an inclination thereto of many days together. So the nature of war consisteth not in actual fighting, but in the known disposition thereto. During all the time there is no assurance to the contrary. Leviathan 1651. The threat of war is always there on an international scale. That threat of war is like not just a rainstorm, right? But the threat of 40 days straight of rainstorms. Okay? This constant dark cloud of war that hangs over humanity guides us in what we do. It's often the same that if you've seen one of my occult sermons called Law and Order, I talk about how the heavy weight of the law stops us from actually maintaining order. Right? It's these overarching concepts, it's these overarching threats to our safety, to our freedom, that are constantly there, that shape our daily lives. They don't need to be there. They aren't necessary. We don't have to live in fear of these things. We can move past them together. Mind war, accordingly, does not seek to eliminate this war impulse, but rather to divert it from a physical to a mental battlefield. The tensions, emotions, and drives remain. The physical destruction of the earth, its resources, and its living beings does not. While in the future, mind war may become the initial war mode, at this time of its introduction and phase-in, it must expect to run into situations already destabilized and torn by physical war. The mind warrior, no matter how well prepared, is not entering a rational environment where both or multiple sides are disposed to reason. In addition to physical war inertia, the continuation and escalation of physical war because of economics, politics, and emotions, participants tend to the conviction that all bridges are burned, and there is no alternative to victory or annihilation. So again, the mind or the war impulse, right, that is always there in us, as long as we are not using that impulse in a physically destructive way, that's what we want to stop first. But then we can take it, that war impulse, and we can move it into other things, right? So let's say like competition for scientific discovery, right? Now we have teams competing against each other, teams working together in factions and groups to overcome a scientific challenge. The war, that war impulse, moves from tearing each other apart and tearing each other down to overcoming a problem, overcoming a math problem, overcoming a science problem, overcoming an emotional problem, right? These are ways that we can continue to have purpose, continue to satiate some of those built-in natural instincts that we have as humans, and put them towards progressive and more important purposes, right? Instead of destroying each other, moving forward with healing the mind, body, and spirit. As George Orwell observed in 1984, war, it will be seen, accomplishes the necessary destruction, but accomplishes it in a psychologically acceptable way. In principle, it would be quite simple to waste the surplus labor of the world by building temples and pyramids, by digging holes and filling them up again, or even by producing vast quantities of goods and then setting fire to them. But this would provide only the economic and not the emotional basis for a hierarchical society. What is concerned here is not the morale of the masses, whose attitude is unimportant so long as they are kept steadily at work, but the morale of the party itself. Even the humblest party member is expected to be competent, industrious, and even intelligent within narrow limits. But it is also necessary that he should be a credulous and ignorant fanatic, whose prevailing moods are fear, hatred, adulation, and orgastic triumph. In other words, it is necessary that he should have the mentality appropriate to the state of war. It does not matter whether the war is actually happening, and since no decisive victory is possible, it does not matter whether the war is going well or badly. All that is needed is that a state of war should exist. This video is being recorded in November of 2023, and the section of George Orwell's books 1984 that I just read from rings clear today. The country, the United States of America, in which I live and am proud to be a citizen of, we find ourselves not in a direct war, whether it be the Ukraine versus Russia war or the Israel versus Palestine war, but we are supporting one side of both of those wars. And what is happening is, although we are not directly participating at this point, we are still emotionally involved. And seeing the emotions of people online about these two wars it's very dynamic. It's very interesting. It's something that people can be studying if you want to understand how people think and how they react to things, right? Step outside of the headline, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't care about this issue or that issue. That's fine. Support whoever you like. Support whatever you like. I'm not here to tell you otherwise. But if you step outside of it for a moment, it's a perfect example of getting to understand how people think and how they react when we're in these type of situations. And as George Orwell said, it doesn't matter whether we are at war or not, as long as the mood of the people is fear, hatred, adulation, and orgiastic triumph, right? We may not be fighting those wars ourselves physically on the battlefield yet, but those who are conducting and supporting those wars and cheering them on, they want us to feel like we are, even if it's just in our hearts and just in our minds, right? They want us to be in the war mode, even though we are not currently fighting the war. Okay? This is why we do this work. This is why we take a clear and thoughtful and truthful look at the situation. We have to step outside of it for a moment. We have to leave our emotions at the curb for a moment. Okay? It can be difficult. If you are emotionally wrapped up in some type of issue, it can be very difficult to take a clear look at it, to gather information, right? But that's what we need to do. We need to step outside of any emotional attachments that we have to things, even if it's just for a moment, and take a real look at the battlefield. What is really happening, right? On the larger scale, not just the skirmishes that change on a daily basis that we are told to focus on. But what is the war overall? Right? What are all aspects of this war, and how are we being manipulated emotionally into supporting one side or the other? Again, it doesn't matter to me. Right? I don't care, other than I want you to be able to take a clear and a clear look at what the real situation is. Step outside of it. How are you being manipulated? Okay? That's what all of this work is for. Making sure that you are not being fed the illusion. Make sure you're not falling for the illusion unless that's something that you want to do. Hey, you go to Disneyland, you fall for the illusion. You enjoy it for the few hours that you're there, right? But you're not going to walk around for the rest of your life thinking everything that you just saw at Disneyland is real. It's not, okay? And that's what we're doing here. Trying to take that realistic look at what is being told to us and what we're being told that we are supposed to be focused on. Every minute that you're focusing on these other things it's time being wasted on not focusing on the things that are really, truly important to you. The mind warrior entering into such an environment, therefore, has a twofold preliminary task: to identify and arrest or reduce the factors pushing for physical war, and to communicate to both political leaders and physical warriors that there is a better alternative: mind war. Complicating this is that the issues in modern physical war are rarely only internal to the participant nations. More often, they are resources or strategic assesses that either other nations or supranational economic institutions covet. Or it may be that the physical war is the result of one or more participant nations experiencing an ideological, economic, and or religious fragmentation. The mind warrior's first task, therefore, is to identify and correlate all such destabilizing factors. Each element's existence and significance should be stated in terms general enough to embrace its impact on the entire situation, such that its hypothetical absence would eliminate its influence. A second reason for this generality is that it facilitates the phase 1 diagnosis process. The building blocks are kept big and simple, allowing diagnosis combinations that are easy to visualize and assemble. Examples of such factor statements might include: participant nation A has too few subsistence resources to provide a minimum survival lifestyle for its people. Participant religion B, which is universal in the participant nation C, feels threatened by different religions in participant nations A and D. Participant of an ethnic group E, diffused throughout the participant nations C and D, feels disenfranchised in and exploited by those participant national governments and wants its own sovereign national standing to correct this. Participant nation D feels that the only way to ensure that it won't be invaded or destroyed is to possess nuclear weapons. Non-participant nations F and G rely upon participant nation C for natural resources H. Non-participant nations I needs to have the commercial route between participant nations A and C kept open. Okay. So we're talking about multiple nations interacting with each other, all having their own purposes, and whether those purposes are economic, right, dealing with trade, dealing with manufacturing, things like that. We rely on each other in this global world. Nothing wrong with that. We're figuring it out. But within those nations, we also have smaller groups of people, whether it's based on culture or religion, and they may not appreciate, or because of their thought process, Because of their religious teachings, they may not want to participate with this nation or that nation, right? Those are things that we need to overcome. We cannot have a world, we cannot have the world crawl to a complete stop because we don't all believe the same thing. We have to work together, and that's the reality. That's one of the realities of mind war. It's one of the realities that has taken me almost my whole life to understand. No matter what situation I've been in, it is very eye-opening. It's kind of like having a bucket of cold water dumped on you when you realize this is my situation, but now I have to, create that Aristos, that best scenario. It can be very difficult to go into a situation where you want to make a lot of changes. You openly and easily see simple changes that could be made that would make everything better. But the reality is that sometimes we just can't do those things, right? And that is very difficult, especially if you have any type of utopian ideals, right? I spent most of my career in the information technology field, working on computers and networks and databases. I had a very utopian vision for IT, for the internet when I was younger. I was so excited for the internet to grow. I was so excited for futuristic ideas like AI, which are coming alive today. The utopian side of me said, this is wonderful. We're going to have free access to information. These computers are going to help us solve issues. It's going to make life better. But what do we see today? The same horrible, filthy, just corrupt thought processes. Just old, dying, institutional beliefs. They're dividing our internet. They're dividing our computer technology. It's very unfortunate that all of these same old, out of date thought processes and beliefs are being carried over, and they are corrupting what should have been a very utopian and ideal device, this technology, right? I always thought computers really were black and white, ones and zeros. It's on or it's off. It works or it doesn't. I had the same hope for information. But sadly, we see that the information we're provided today is more gray. It's mixed together. It is propagandized, right? Not in a good way. It is corrupted, and we see disinformation and misinformation, lies, and psychological attacks coming from multiple sides, right? And it's very unfortunate. Maybe someday that will change, but for now, this is our current situation. The phase 0 list is complete when its theoretical removal would imply a peaceful, stable situation. Completion of the phase 0 list results in 5 immediate and self-evident revelations. Number 1, any one of these factors can be used to justify and trigger physical war. Number 2, the greater the number of factors, the higher probability of physical war. Number 3, the greater the number of factors, the less the participants can even visualize, much less plan or execute a physical war solution to all of them. Number 4, if no alternative is available, physical war will commence anyway. And number 5, the onset of physical war will further fragment, confuse, and complicate the original factors, so that by the time the physical war concludes, if it does, the original factors will no longer be either identifiable or relevant. These being self-evident, the usual demagogic justifications for physical war evaporate, and what remains is Orwell's explanation above, that physical war is undertaken for its own sake, not to prevent, solve, or correct anything else. Mind war, on the other hand, is necessarily problem-driven. It cannot function otherwise. So again, the author is saying here that sometimes physical war, it's conducted just for the physical war itself and nothing else. It's not there to solve problems. It doesn't care. Sometimes it's there just to be its own entity. Sometimes it's there just to cause problems, which will give people purpose to solve them. B, physical war provocation, removal, and reversal. Physical war requires an excuse for action and a calculated escalation towards the excuse. Mind war can expect to enter a problem situation where one or more such preliminary physical war provocations are already underway. If the mind war campaign is to succeed, these provocations must immediately be identified and aborted. Among the more common are, number 1, paramilitary operations under the guise of intelligence. Intelligence normally refers to the gathering and explaining of information about a problem situation, including information which the participants don't want known. The purpose of intelligence is simply to present decision makers with a clear, accurate, and complete picture of the situation, so that any decisions they make are not in ignorance of critical factors. The atmosphere of secrecy in which intelligence collections efforts occur, however, has led to various agencies extending their activities into clandestine active measures such as paramilitary combat, kidnapping, and assassination. While the temptation to meddle in another nation's internal affairs is understandable, such activities violate the principle of national sovereignty and destroy the intruder's image as an open and honest international participant. Intelligence must be limited to intelligence. So again, on a personal level, we talked about taking that clear look at our current situation. Now, one way that we can do this, because through this whole process, allowing yourself to kind of play the part of a character is going to help, right? You play a character throughout your life. The person you are at home is different than the person that you are at school. The person you are at home is different than the person you are at work. You're different in front of your friends than your family members, right? And when you're alone, you are a completely different person from all of them. So in that initial mind war phase where you are trying to gather intelligence to create a clear picture of your situation, think of yourself like a spy, if you will, right? Take the time to clandestinely gather information on those around you, right? Do that with the purpose of bettering the scenario, creating that Aristos, the best possible scenario for your current situation, right? Have fun with it. This doesn't have to be some type of process that is scary or sad or a chore. Enjoy yourself, folks, right? Put a smile on your own face by doing some of these things, right? Play the character. It's okay. It's okay to do that. It's okay to take a light-hearted look at some very serious topics. Okay? We don't want to wear ourselves out with anger and sadness and only focusing on the things that are negative in our lives that we're trying to change. Okay? Try to enjoy yourselves while you do this, folks. That's the whole purpose here. Number 2, emotion-arousing violence. While the term terrorism has been overused to mean merely any individual or group resisting any participant nation's government control, its original meaning was the employment of terror, e.g., intimidating or violent actions designed to frighten both recipients and witnesses into silence and cooperation. The term state terrorism identifies similar behavior by established governments. A campaign of terror is meant to convince the recipients that the government cannot or will not protect them, while on the other hand, failure to cooperate with the terrorists will result in punishment or death. As the government and or any occupying forces cannot know where such terrorists will strike next, they cannot be defeated in the conventional sense. Rather, they must be neutralized by removing their motivation, be it religious, ideological, ethnic, etc. This is a task for strategic mind war branch applications. The key element of terror is its indiscrimination. It injures or kills persons not just directly, but also randomly and incidentally. Hence, the terrorist weapons of choice are imprecise and remote ones. Roadside explosives, suicide vests, booby traps, and, in state terrorism, missiles, aircraft bombs, and drones. The terrorizing of the affected populace is in no small part because it is aware that even the most docile conduct is no guarantee of safety. Terror becomes the way of daily life with commensurate physical and psychological toll. Again, the book Mind War was written for global, international, and national situations, right? But we are taking the tactics of mind war and we're applying them to our personal lives. So let's take a moment to think about the terrorists in our life. Let's say you live in that political household and you have a family member who seems to have lost his or her mind to politics. It seems to be that that's all they can focus on, right? They constantly talk about it. The right versus the left, the red versus the blue. It's always the battle. They're always in war mode. Who is the terrorist in that situation? Anybody? Anybody? The news. The nightly news. The internet news. The internet websites. Because here's why. Here's how this works. Every night, that person in your family who is overly political puts themselves into a situation to where they can be attacked, right? Not physically attacked, mentally and emotionally attacked by the news that is being brought to them. Okay? Folks, the news that is coming from the mainstream media, from cable news, from most websites where you are getting your daily news from, they purposely over-exaggerate everything. They purposely add emotion into it. It's amazing when you step back for just a moment with the goal of seeing this as it really is. Once you realize that the things you're seeing on television, through the news media and things like that, once you understand the propaganda that is built into it, you'll never see it the same again. It truly is amazing. It's truly waking up from that hypnotic state, from that magic spell that's being cast over you, right? I know many of you out there who are listening right now, you've already broke that spell. You understand what I'm talking about, right? You turn the news on and you hear the way that these people talk about each other, and it is absolutely insane. It just doesn't make any sense. The provocation, just the complete exaggeration of everything that they say. It's clear, it's blatant, it's just naked in your face lies, right? Again, I don't care about what side you believe in. That's not what I'm here to tell you. I'm telling you, they're both lying. Okay? So again, that scenario, you have that family member who is, let's say, okay, we'll put this in a situation. They simply are watching the news every night. All right? It's like they are going out to the farmer's market to buy some fresh produce. They think that they're doing something peaceful. They think that they're doing something that should be safe. And there, wouldn't you know, as soon as you turn that news on, there's some type of an explosion at the market. And now you're sitting there going, you're looking at your family member. You can see them getting angry as the news is being read. You can see their emotions reeling while you're looking back at the newscaster and the story that they're telling, and you're just saying, it is so over-exaggerated. Even if the information that they're providing is factual, the way they do it, the emotion that they put into it, the manipulation that they put into it, that's the terrorism. That's what I'm talking about. Terrorism comes in more forms than just physical. We say it right here in this last sentence. Let me reread it. Terror becomes the way of daily life with commensurate physical and psychological toll. It's the psychological toll that most of us here in the United States of America and probably around the world, that's the toll that's being taken on us. Right? When you are watching the news and you're constantly seeing all of this pain and suffering and all of this violence and all of this hatred that seems to be running at a 24/7 level, it gets us all riled up. Take a look out your window. Is there any violence in the streets? Take a look at those around you, in your home, in the peaceful home that you're trying to create. Is there any violence in your home? If you're lucky enough to live in a home where there isn't violence? So why are we letting it into our lives through the media? Be very careful, folks. This is just one example of how these terror tactics are used against us in a non-physical way. And that leads us into number 3, false flag operations. Governments kill or allow to be killed their own people when it is deemed necessary to create popular fear of and antagonism towards a scapegoat target which has itself not committed any such act. History is replete with examples, exposed or still clouded in deception and suspicion. While obviously effective in producing the immediately desired effect, false flags are ethically despicable and shameful. Such actions must be absolutely rejected as a policy option and when discovered, exposed and punished without excuse, evasion, or equivocation. I'm not here to talk about any conspiracy theories that may be considered false flag operations. I think everyone has their own opinions on that if they think about it at all. But this is a very difficult topic, right? This is difficult. This is, again, how are these outside situations being brought into our lives to affect us emotionally? How are these outside events being used to take a psychological toll on us? Again, as the same way that once you kind of step back and recognize that mainstream media news sources are very manipulative, you start to look at the events that they're reporting on and realizing there may be a little manipulation involved in those events as well. It's very difficult to see these things in any other way once you start to recognize it. But it's very important as a mind warrior to be able to take that clear, truthful look at situations as they occur. And today, it's harder than ever, folks. Be careful out there when you're out there researching, and not even past subjects. As events occur, be careful. It can be emotionally difficult to see with your own eyes something happening and being told that's not what happened. It happened this way. This is now the truth. This is now what everyone believes. And you're standing there going, wait, what? I didn't see it that way. I saw something completely different. What are you all talking about? Right? It can be difficult. It can take an emotional and psychological toll on you. Even more than the actual false flag event itself, right? And the official narrative. Those can often take a toll on people, the masses in general. Those of you who have kind of woken up to these things, right? It can be difficult also. So be careful with that. Number 4, drum beating. A lie repeated frequently and forcefully enough will eventually be popularly accepted as truth unless it is quickly exposed and refuted. While again an effective physical war agitating device, this procedure violates the simple standard of truth and honesty. Countering the big lie is again a mind war branch strategic task. Think about what the author just said. One of the main goals of the mind war branch is countering the big lie. The big lie has become a more corrupted and used tool over the last few years than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Over and over and over again, the big lie is pushed from this event or that event, no matter what it might be. And here in the mind war, as mind warriors, we are going to counter that. Okay? We are countering the big lie. Not because we want our side to win versus their side. That's not the goal. The goal is the truth. What is the truth about the situation that we're in? We're tired of the big lie. Number 5, population repression. Governmental limitation or removal of civil liberties and rights on the grounds that this is necessary to fight terrorism does nothing to deter terrorists, who will not respect any such limitations, but it will both aggravate the populace towards the scapegoat and discourage protest against the physical war promotion. The more a populace is prevented from articulating dissent and alternative courses of action, the more it can be goaded into physical war fervor. There's a lot of things that I would like to say on this about events that occurred at the turn of the millennium. I'm going to hold my tongue on those, as I don't want to overstep my boundaries on the platforms that I provide my information to, right? I think many of you can guess what I'm trying to think here and what I'm saying. Being aggravated as a populace towards a scapegoat. We see it over and over and over again. Whether it was events that occurred over 20 years ago or whether it was events that occurred just a few years ago. Right? We see this over and over and over again. An enemy being created in order to get people riled up to move against them. It's sad, folks, but that's the world we live in. And the more we expose these tactics, the more that we can bring peace to our own lives. Because once you learn the tactics of these larger organizations and institutions and how they conduct these psychological operations on you and those in your lives, you can be open to it. You can understand the tools that are being used against you, and you can put your defenses up, and you can start to teach those around you the tools of defense against the mind war. Number 6, degradation of the individual. In Chapter 1, the first and second laws of mind war recognize and respect the dignity of each human being, regardless of his place within the overall mind war campaign. His bodily mechanisms and thought processes are accessed only non-injuriously for the sole purpose of inclining and inducing him to cooperate and contribute to attainment of the aristos and subsequent parapolitical polis. In a physical war environment, on the other hand, the individual is dehumanized into the enemy, whereupon it can be shot, beaten, kidnapped, tortured, exiled, imprisoned, and or killed. If any of this happens by accident, it is mere collateral damage of no more consequence than, if anything, a token cash payment to surviving family. The history of physical war is the dark legacy of man, the killer angel's contempt for life. Indeed, what is ultimately at issue here is the very phenomenon of life itself. Either it is a divine spark to be revered and protected, or it is nothing more than an accidental meat machine to be exploited or experimented as desired. There is no middle ground between these alternatives. Either you respect life or you don't. Either you appreciate and love and care for humanity as a whole, or you don't. As individuals, we may have our own beliefs on this subject, but it's the organizations, corporations, and institutions that have the power to affect this thought process, this degradation of the individual. It is the power, it is the overwhelming influence that these institutions and organizations and corporations have over the individual that may change our minds from being someone who truly does revere life and appreciate life and want to protect it. It is these organizations, institutions, and corporations that change our minds to see it a different way. And they can do that through all these different tools we've just talked about, with the goal of creating enemies of the other. Those other people, whatever reason that they are other than us, whatever category that they've put these others in, and now made them the enemy, and now they have made all of you lose your humanity. You no longer care about the individual, you only care about the cause. Mind war integrity, C. A mind war campaign cannot succeed if the house be divided against itself. Physical war pressures, both overt and covert, over which the United States and other participants have control, must be arrested before a mind war solution can be initiated. Otherwise, the mind war campaign will be assumed to be a sham, a mere show distraction of the actual physical war agenda. Indeed, it is the suspension of all physical war pressures, albeit temporarily and provisionally, which gives the mind war campaign its initial dignity and credibility. Physical war habituates may deride the rigorously idealistic taboos above as naive, wishful thinking in today's harsh world of routine callousness and cruelty. Nice guys, they will insist, finish last. Nevertheless, if humanity is to be brought back from the brink of self-annihilation, it can only be by a conviction of honesty, empathy, and humanitarianism, so resolute that all such cynicism shatters before it. Nowhere is this better argued than by Albert Camus in the letter to a German friend while serving in the French resistance during World War II. Here is a section from that letter. You never believed in the meaning of this world, and you therefore deduced the idea that everything was equivalent and that good and evil could be defined according to one's wishes. You supposed that in the absence of any human or divine code, the only values were those of the animal world. In other words, violence and cunning. Hence, you concluded that man was negligible and that his soul could be killed, and that in the maddest of histories, the only pursuit for the individual was the adventure of power, and his only morality, the realism of consequences. And, to tell the truth, I, believing I thought as you did, saw no valid argument to answer you, except a fierce love of justice, which, after all, seemed to me as unreasonable as the most sudden passion. Where lay the difference? Simply that you readily accepted despair and I never yielded to it. Simply that you saw the injustice of our condition to the point of being willing to add to it, whereas it seemed to me that man must exalt justice in order to fight against external injustice, create happiness in order to protect against the universe of unhappiness. Because you turned your despair into intoxication, because you freed yourself from it by making a principle of it, you were willing to destroy man's works and to fight him in order to add to his basic misery. Meanwhile, refusing to accept that despair and that tortured world, I merely wanted men to rediscover their solidarity in order to wage war against their revolting fate. As you can see, from the same principles, we derived quite different codes, because you were tired of fighting heaven. You chose injustice and sided with the gods. I, on the contrary, chose justice in order to remain faithful to the world. I continue to believe that this world has no ultimate meaning, but I know that something in it has a meaning, and that is man, because he is the only creature to insist on having one. This world has at least the truth of man, and our task is to provide its justification against fate itself. And it has no justification but man. Hence, we must be saved if we want to save the idea we have of life. With our scornful smile, you will ask me, what do you mean by saving man? And with all my being, I shout to you that I mean not mutilating him, and yet giving a chance to the justice that man alone can conceive. The author of that section, of that letter, understood that it is our goal as humanity to work towards an eternal happiness. It's there. It's available. It's right in front of us. It's at our fingertips. And yet we fight against happiness, peace. We fight against those things with our despair. We fight against those things because we don't think that there's another option. But folks, I promise you there is. Hence, such clearing of the field is not as fanciful as it might seem. It is clearly in the interest of all participants to avoid the death and destruction of physical war. And mind war is the most methodical and practical means for realizing this. If one or more participants refuse to halt their physical war efforts, the Mind War Command, assembled to assess and activate the Mind War campaign, may decline to proceed further. The situation then reverts to previous physical war-oriented authorities and agenda. This acceptance or rejection of mind war capability also highlights the limitations of a mind war apparatus constructed solely within the U.S. Army. Ideally, mind war should emanate as policy from the highest levels of government, with the Army's mind war campaign finding the diplomatic and pre-physical war field already cleared for it when a situation is designated. Instead, this experimental Army component must anticipate Phase 0, in which it must discover and attempt to bring to a halt ongoing physical war pressures. Within the mind war structure, this is principally a task for the Metaforce branch, since it possesses both the mobility to examine the subject area and the versatility to avoid dangerous confrontations while doing so. Phase 0 concludes when the Metaforce branch reports its finding to the Mind War campaign, or the Mind War command, which then makes the decision either to proceed to Phase 1 or to reject the Mind War assignment. Given the abundance and strength of pre-physical war forces resisting mind war, is mind war even worth pursuing? The answer to this must be sought in the innate character of mankind. If de Sade correctly arrested the human race to be motivated by and committed to its self-destruction, then, as Hobbes predicted, we are condemned to a future which is nasty, brutish, and short. But if, as Abraham Lincoln believed, there are better angels of our nature, whom we may summon to inspire our compassion for and behavior towards one another, then mind war is not naive idealism, but an eminently worthwhile and achievable virtue. Where it can be brought to bear, it must be. right, folks, that brings us to chapter 7. We'll pick up there in the next episode of Mind War. I really appreciate you being here with me today for this episode of Mind War, episode 9. Please take a moment to visit my Etsy page where you can find all kinds of cool hoodies, sweatshirts, long sleeve shirts, t-shirts, hats, beanies, and stickers. If you enjoy this series, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and even X. I have an X account. There's not much on it, but it's there. So please feel free again if you have any questions, reach out to me. Again, I appreciate you being here for this episode of Mind War. Sincerely, your friend Victor, the Occult Technician.